Hi, my name is Suzie. I'm an activist and a journalist from Auckland, New Zealand. For years, I've worked on controversial issues like the corruption of our intelligence agencies. I was severely targeted as a result of my work. This led to my articles being amplified by the world's most accomplished publisher. In 2016, I made a documentary about how and why I was forced to leave my country. I have now sought refuge in Russia, and my situation has become public. Together with my best friend Ksenia, I want to show you what life is really like in Moscow.
The most unlikely TV hosts. Today there are hundreds of thousands of people marching to remember the millions, tens of millions of lives lost. Here we are marching in the Victory Day parade. Every now and then you hear a huge cry go up from the crowd, "Ura!" which means hooray. Hooray that the war is ended. Orange and black ribbons represent Victory Day. They're handing out free food and free water to those who are marching.
Moscow is a living art gallery. Classical masterpieces are mounted on the facades of buildings and proudly displayed facing the street to be admired by passers-by. Even those who are too elderly or too infirm to march proudly display photos of their ancestors from their apartment windows and are cheered by the crowd.
Может, она начинается с весенних запет из дворца, с этой дороги проселочной, которой не видно конца. С чего начинается Родина? Окошек горящих вдали, со старой отцовских будёнок, что где-то в шкафу мы нашли, а может она начинается со стука вагона.
Ладно, пойдем дальше. Спасибо!
It's been a long, emotional and historic walk, and it seems only fitting for it to end in front of one of the most beautiful buildings in the world. What an amazing day, what an incredible match. Today we have with us the much accomplished peace activist, David Swanson.
Hi.
And Ksenia.
I'm back. So tell us about the purpose of your trip to Moscow and what is your impression about Moscow? What were the people that you met here in Moscow?
Well, I came with about 25, 30 people from the United States with a group called the Center for Citizen Initiatives to do citizen diplomacy, to meet Russians, make friends, go back home, tell people in the United States that I met Russians and they're friendly, and tell them what I learned. And so we've been meeting with business leaders and journalists and activists and former presidents, in the case of Mikhail Gorbachev, and TV pundits and the best tour guides in Moscow, and
Yeah, that's us.
and learning a lot about a country and a city and a government that the United States government is continuing to demonize and abuse, as it's been doing for many, many years.
Do you have a couple of questions?
You're supposed to ask a follow-up question. Aren't you really lying your ass off?
Ksenia. Oh, we will edit the hell out of this, don't worry. Ksenia, there are beautiful mansions all around Moscow, and there's one right behind me now. What is this place?
Well, this beautiful building is one of the faculties of Moscow State University, the oldest university of Moscow. And this is the Faculty of Asian and African Studies here. And right by the university, well, this building here, the round one, is the church of Saint Tatiana, who is considered to be the saint patron of the students.
Awesome.
Yes. What shall I ask?
What do you think so far? What are the major differences between American impressions of Russia and your experiences here?
Yeah, so what will you tell people in America when you're back? What are your impressions of Moscow and Russian people in general?
Well, that it's a safe and developed nation where they don't need to bring emergency medical kits and weapons. They can travel as tourists and meet friendly people in a city here that's 20 times the size of Washington D.C. and has internet and has metro trains and
In the cars, yeah.
and internet in the metro trains, yeah, and that they will have a great time, and that the Russian people are friendly and helpful and love America, although they don't ask for help from the CIA or the Pentagon, and they don't resent, when the United States has openly bragged about having influenced Russian elections and put in, somebody like Boris Yeltsin, the Donald Trump of Russia. They don't resent it, and they don't hate us.
Oh, okay, there is a military helicopter. It must be, by the way, Vladimir Putin going back home from the Kremlin.
It
from
must
his
be. This is
working place.
my first encounter with Vladimir
Yeah,
Putin.
this is it's our second episode, and this is the second time we meet Vladimir Putin.
Incredible. He's
Yeah.
everywhere.
Putin keeps photobombing our TV show. Okay, tell us where are we, Ksenia?
So we are at the State Library, named after Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. Is almost everything here. Yeah, and we are in front of the statue dedicated to the very famous writer Dostoevsky. What were the novels that you read by Dostoevsky?
Oh, Crime and Punishment and Notes from Underground, and I've read his diary, which is like, this big, and I hope most Americans have. I think, this idea that Russian culture and American culture are different and separate doesn't make much sense when you think about how much Russian culture there is in the United States. I love reading Dostoevsky. I used to read him all the time, especially his diary.
Don't you think that the works by Dostoevsky are too difficult to read by an average person? They are too deep, psychological, and gloomy.
I don't think so. There's gloomy stuff on TV all the time. There's gloomy stuff on the news. For God's sake, I think if people aren't smart enough to read Dostoevsky, we need to have a campaign to destroy televisions and improve schools. Maybe take some military money and put it into education, because what a waste to not be able to read Dostoevsky.
Now we are going to one of the most beautiful cathedrals, as I said, that was demolished in 1929 by the order of Stalin, and only in 2000 it was rebuilt, obviously after the fall of the Soviet Union, by the petitions of people and the head of the church.
Yeah, and it is beautiful.
Now, here we are. We have arrived at Christ the Saviour Cathedral. The original church was destroyed here by the communists. And on the side of this beautiful cathedral, they wanted to build the Temple of Communism, or the Palace of Soviets. That was to be the first skyscraper in Russia, 400 meters tall, with a huge statue of Lenin on top of it. And with a library in his head and helicopter grounds on his hand.
David, this very peaceful, reflecting pool seems like the perfect place to ask you, how do we end war? We know it's a lie. How do we end it?
Well, I'm working on this project called World Beyond War, where we're trying to educate people about the possibility of ending war, which is, the biggest step and halfway there, if people believed you could end war. Because in the United States in particular, they don't. They think it's impossible. They think it's human nature or economic determinism or historical inevitability or necessary and right and just, even if evil, because it's imposed on us by, nasty foreigners. Even Eisenhower's speech about the dangers of the military-industrial complex, which everyone likes to quote, if you read the whole speech, it's mostly about how it's all Russia's fault, the Soviet Union's fault. So he'd like to stop going along with the military-industrial complex, but you can't because of the Soviet Union. So part of the process of education is looking at all the past wars and how avoidable and unnecessary and evil and destructive they've been. Part of it is looking at the institution of war, which does far more damage in preparing for wars than in fighting actual wars. That is, the trillions of dollars taken away from providing medicine and food and water and everything we need, kills far more people than wars do. And the way the institution takes away our civil liberties, erodes our rights through this threat of enemies, takes away our natural environment, the military being the biggest destroyer that we have in the United States and elsewhere of the natural environment, as well as taking all the money that's needed for things like environmental protection, and going through all the areas of issues that people care about, and sexism and racism and violence and everything that war fuels, as those things in turn fuel more wars. What could we do if we didn't have that institution? And then looking at the steps you can take to get to a world where we solve our problems nonviolently, and what institutions can be built that will do that, and what are the tactics and the powers of nonviolent activism that people somehow remain unaware of, despite the incredible accomplishments, especially during the past century and half century, of nonviolent movements to do things that once upon a time everybody believed could only be done with war. And so once we get enough education, we have to get enough activism, and we have to organize enough nonviolent action toward ending war, which can't be only building peace or making ourselves peaceful or sitting by reflecting pools like this and feeling peaceful and hoping that magically it will make the world peaceful. It has to also be about going after the war machinery and the corruption in the governments of the war machinery and exposing it and putting an end to it.
And also recognizing the falsehoods that they tell people to convince them to participate in these wars.
So there's this idea that if you tie a just cause to a war, then it's a just war. Or if the other side of a war was doing evil deeds, then it's a just war. Whereas the question ought to be, is a war the best tactic, the best strategy for this situation? And the number of situations where you can make that case is rapidly diminishing, and in no cases includes justifying a wealthy nation like the United States attacking poor nations halfway around the globe.
So the first thing that someone would say to you about World War II, I think, in that case would be, well, how else could we have stopped Hitler?
Yeah, well, when we play games with a time machine, everybody likes to go back to the instant when they think a horrible decision had to be made. But almost nobody who justifies World War II justifies World War I. And almost nobody believes World War II could have happened without World War I. And so if you had not fought World War I, or you had not ended it so stupidly with such vicious punishment of Germany that it just recently finished paying off the debts from, if you had not spent the intervening years supporting the Nazis, Wall Street investing in the Nazis, if you had not provided the Nazis with the inspiration and the tools of the racist laws of segregation and immigration in the United States, if you had not supported programs of eugenics, if you had instead invested in nonviolent diplomacy, if you had considered how to help Germany as Germany was helped after World War II, after World War I, and how to help Germany develop a democratic representative government rather than well, let them do whatever they want because the evil in the world is the Soviet Union. You know that within hours of the defeat of the Nazis, Winston Churchill was proposing a new war against the Soviet Union using German troops, right? I mean, this was seen as the real enemy throughout the alliance with it in World War II. People in the United States have all kinds of myths built up around World War II, including that the Nazis were going to invade the United States and take it over. Franklin Roosevelt used forged documents and lies and exaggerations about U.S. ships sunk supposedly innocently. Just straight plagiarism of Woodrow Wilson and from the previous war. But in fact, leading up to that war, the Nazis' attempt was to expel all the Jews from Germany, and the United States and the other Western nations agreed that they would not
They didn't want to borrow it.
don't want them anywhere. And Franklin Roosevelt prevented any legislation to let significant numbers of Jewish refugees in. There were heroic efforts to let some of them in to the United States. A ship of Jewish refugees was chased away from Florida by the Coast Guard. And the peace activists who knew this was happening and wanted to prevent it from the start and went to Winston Churchill and his foreign secretary during the war and said, evacuate the Jews, and they were told, we can't be bothered, and through the war, no efforts to diplomatic or military, no bombing of the train tracks to the camps, etc., no immediate rescuing of the people from the camps. It had absolutely nothing to do with that. That's a post-war justification for the war. In 1918, everybody wanted to end war forever and make Woodrow Wilson a truth teller. And by 1928, all the big nations had signed a treaty banning war called the Kellogg-Briand Pact, the signing of which in Paris was the first recognition of the existence of the Soviet Union and flying of its flag in Paris. And there was a notion that we can get beyond war. But the profiteers never stopped building more and more weapons. There was eager preparation in the United States for World War II, and there was intentional antagonization of Japan, and there was commitment to Churchill to provoke an event with Japan to get the United States into both sides of that war. At Pearl Harbor and the other attacks of that day through the Pacific.
I feel like I've been going through this huge re-education myself because I'm learning all of these things that nobody ever taught me in school. The official story that we got in school about World War II in New Zealand, in regards to Russia and in regards to America, is that we should be extremely grateful to America, because if they had not dropped the nuclear bomb, we would all be speaking Japanese in the Pacific Islands and in New Zealand. Literally, that is the quote. We would be speaking Japanese.
Yeah.
And in terms of Russia, all we were ever taught was that the Germans invaded Russia and then they all died in the cold winter.
Yeah.
End of story.
After.
No mention of 27 million dead Russians. No mention of America not actually having gotten to the war for years and years and years after Russia had been invaded.
You know that the Russians defeated the Germans and that the United States delayed the invasion of France for years to the great frustration of Stalin in order to spare U.S. lives. And presumably you know that when Truman went on the radio and said he had bombed a Japanese military base in Japan, in Hiroshima, he meant a city. And a non-military city at that, and that they bombed another city 2 days later in order to demonstrate the power of a different type of bomb.
A grand experiment is what that was.
And that Truman knew, and his generals knew, and they said at the time and argued to him at the time and argued after the fact that it was completely unnecessary for Japanese surrender, that the Japanese were prepared and ready to surrender. They wanted only to keep their emperor, which the U.S. would not agree with until after having dropped the bombs and then agreed with, and that inevitably, possibly even prior to, but certainly after the coming Soviet invasion, Japan was going to surrender. The United States wanted Japan to surrender prior to any Soviet involvement. The United States wanted to be the master of the world following World War II, and was ready, in fact, to launch a new war against the Soviet Union in some form. Winston Churchill, the day...
And on what pretext?
Of the need to protect the free
Russians
world from
to drop
communism.
The bomb over these states, yes. So that Russians don't do it first. A preventive drop of nuclear bomb.
Yeah, develop the part of the justification for developing the nuke, as with all evil things, was if we don't do it first, somebody else will do it.
I also have been watching some of the untold history of the United States, which was made by Oliver Stone and your friend Peter Kuznick. What has been your involvement with Peter and Oliver?
Oh, well, Peter is a great professor, educator, speaker. He takes students to Hiroshima from the United States every year. He's, written that book. The book is even better than the films, The Untold History of the United States, that he and Oliver Stone put together. And he's helped me organize conferences where he is at American University in Washington, D.C. And he's a real agitator and activist for truth, for people in the United States learning the truth about World War II. I'm looking forward to Oliver Stone on Putin, and highly recommend Oliver Stone on Edward Snowden in terms of his recent films.
Awesome. I'm sure many people have seen those, and hopefully many more will. The sun is setting in Moscow as we come to the end of our show. We've been extremely blessed today to hang out with an amazing person, fantastic conversation, learn so much, and enjoy these beautiful sights. Thank you for being with us.